They told you history was a dignified march of progress. Beneath every polished textbook is a swamp of disasters and breathtakingly confident decisions that made everything worse. Consider this a forensic audit. You have been warned. 1. For most of recorded history, the treatment for almost any ailment was bloodletting. George Washington died in 1799 after his physicians drained 5 pints of blood from him in a single day to treat a throat infection. His doctors believed they were helping. The gap between confidence and competence here is frankly architectural. 2. In the 1800s, the standard treatment for anxiety and what physicians called female complaints was a procedure performed by licensed doctors, described in peer-reviewed journals, and billed as routine therapeutic care. Nobody appears to have found it worth questioning. Historians looking back at the clinical literature have had what can only be described as a very complicated time. 3. In 1940, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge earned the nickname Galloping Gertie because it oscillated dramatically in the wind. People drove across it for the thrill. Engineers were aware of the problem and working on it. The bridge collapsed 4 months after opening. The only casualty was a dog named Tubby, whose owner couldn't coax him out of an abandoned car as the structure disintegrated. A detailed history preserved with the specific cruelty it reserves for its most ironic moments. 4. Aristotle concluded that women had fewer teeth than men. This claim appears in his writings confidently, specifically, and without any attempt to verify it by the most straightforward method available, counting. Aristotle was married. Twice. 5. Napoleon Bonaparte was not unusually short, approximately 5 feet 6, squarely average for a Frenchman of his era. The myth came from a unit conversion error. French inches were longer than British inches. British caricaturist James Gilray amplified the image, and it stuck. The furious little emperor we carry in our heads is essentially bad arithmetic compounded by propaganda. 6. In the 1950s, the CIA explored using cats as living guidance systems for acoustic bombs. The theory, a cat, naturally drawn to human warmth and sound, could steer a bomb toward enemy targets. The first test ended when the cat was struck by a taxi during the drop. The project was described in CIA documents as too difficult to control, among the most understated technical assessments in intelligence history. 7. In 1962, Decca Records turned down the Beatles, with the executive remarking that guitar music was on its way out. Within 2 years, the band had transformed popular music globally. Decca signed Brian Poole and the Tremolos instead. The quality of a decision is not always measurable at the moment it is made. Sometimes you have to wait for the reverb. 8. Medieval European maps placed Jerusalem at the center of the world, east at the top, and populated the edges with dog-headed men, people who shaded themselves with a single enormous foot and a race that ate only the smell of apples. These were the authoritative geographic reference materials of their era, displayed in cathedrals and consulted by scholars. What happens when confident people don't have enough data? Now you know. 9. In 1962, the U.S. military detonated a nuclear warhead in space. The test knocked out streetlights in Hawaii, 900 miles away, and created radiation belts that damaged satellites belonging to multiple countries over the following years. The scientists were, by contemporary accounts, somewhat surprised by the collateral disruption. Somewhat surprised when conducting a thermonuclear detonation in the magnetosphere is a fairly significant operational gap. 10. Thomas Migley Jr. invented leaded gasoline and demonstrated its safety by pouring it over his hands and inhaling its vapors. Despite having already been seriously poisoned by lead and recently taken medical leave to recover. The gasoline deposited lead, a neurotoxin with no safe exposure level, into the air of every city on Earth for decades. He also invented Freon, which depleted the ozone layer. One scientist said he had more impact on the atmosphere than any other single organism in Earth's history. Not the record you want. 11. In the 1800s, physicians promoted sanitized tapeworm pills as a weight loss solution. The parasite would absorb your calories, no diet required. Side effects included brain cysts, blindness, epilepsy, and death. That regulatory intervention was eventually required to stop tapeworm pill sales is, in itself, a complete sentence about the unregulated marketplace of ideas. 12. On January 15, 1919, a Boston storage tank containing 2.3 million gallons of molasses failed. A 15 to 40-foot wave traveled through the streets at 35 miles per hour, killing 21 people. The tank had been visibly leaking. Residents had complained. The complaints were not acted upon, placing this in the much larger category of preventable things that happened anyway. 13. In 1858, the River Thames became so contaminated with raw sewage that Parliament suspended its sessions due to the smell, historically known as the Great Stink. Cost arguments had defeated sewer infrastructure bills for years. It took the literal smell of the problem reaching the politicians' own offices before the bill passed. Sometimes consequences have to become extremely personal before institutions respond. 14. Columbus didn't prove the Earth was round. Educated Europeans already knew that. The actual dispute was about size. Columbus believed the Earth was significantly smaller than it is. Had the Americas not been in the way, he would have run out of supplies in the middle of a much larger ocean than he anticipated. He wasn't a visionary defying flat Earth believers. He was a man with bad math who accidentally found a continent he spent his remaining years refusing to acknowledge. 15. In 1876, Western Union was offered Bell's telephone patent for $100,000. Their internal memo, preserved and readable today, called it an electrical toy with no commercial applications. They declined. Bell's telephone obsoleted Western Union's entire telegram business. The memo survives as one of business history's most useful documents. Not for what it got right, but for the anatomy of how institutional thinking can be wrong in exactly the way that matters most. 16. The Segway launched in 2001 with hype suggesting it would be bigger than the internet. The actual product was a $5,000 scooter banned from sidewalks in most cities, best known today as the vehicle of mall security guards. The company was sold for a reported $75,000, less than 15 units at retail, to a buyer who later died when he rode one off a cliff on his property. That last fact is not embellished. 17. Caligula declared war on Neptune, the god of the sea. His soldiers were marched to the English Channel and ordered to stab the waves with their spears, then collect seashells as spoils of war to bring back to Rome as proof of victory. Whether this was delusion, ritual, or an elaborate way to humiliate his own soldiers remains debated. The image of a Roman legion stabbing the ocean on imperial orders transcends the usual standards of historical footnotes. 18. And somehow we're still just scratching the surface. Before anesthesia, surgical speed was a celebrated professional virtue. Robert Liston could amputate a leg in under 30 seconds. In one notorious operation, he accidentally amputated his assistant's fingers along with the patient's leg and cut a spectator's coat, who died of shock. The patient and assistant later died of infection. The only surgery in history credited with a 300% mortality rate. He was considered the best in the field. 19. In 1961, a B-52 broke apart over North Carolina, releasing 2 hydrogen bombs. An investigation found 3 of the 4 safety mechanisms on one bomb had failed or activated in the arming direction. A single, inexpensive low-voltage switch separated a routine Tuesday from a multi-megaton nuclear detonation on American soil. The incident was classified for decades. The word close is doing a remarkable amount of work in that sentence. 20. The Vasa was the most powerful warship in the Baltic, launched in 1628 with enormous ceremony. It sank 14 minutes into its maiden voyage, in full view of the crowd gathered to watch. Pre-launch stability testing, in which 30 men running across the deck nearly capsized it, had already identified the problem. Nobody wanted to delay the launch by raising inconvenient structural concerns. The Vasa now sits in a Stockholm museum, which is honestly one of the better outcomes available to a ship that sinks on its maiden voyage. 21. In the 1950s, Ford built the Nucleon, a concept car powered by a small nuclear reactor in the trunk, recharged at nuclear service stations every 5,000 miles. The concept documentation included no safety specifications, on the grounds those would be worked out later. Ford's confidence that a consumer nuclear automobile was a near-term product is the kind of institutional optimism that is almost moving in retrospect. 22. In the 1890s, cocaine was an active ingredient in throat lozenges, toothache drops, and the original Coca-Cola. Sigmund Freud promoted it as a treatment for morphine addiction. He prescribed it to a friend suffering from morphine dependence, successfully curing the addiction by replacing it with cocaine addiction. An outcome even Freud eventually acknowledged was suboptimal. The regulatory environment was, to put it gently, permissive. 23. In the early 1900s, federal scientist Harvey Wiley recruited volunteers, the Poison Squad, to eat meals laced with borax, formaldehyde, and sulfuric acid in controlled doses to document health effects. Several became seriously ill. Their data helped pass the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. Somewhere in the federal archives are health journals kept by government clerks who voluntarily ate formaldehyde for science. That sentence is entirely accurate. 24. In 1999, NASA lost the $327 million Mars Climate Orbiter because one team used metric units and another used imperial, and nobody caught it. The spacecraft was destroyed entering the Martian atmosphere at the wrong angle. A $327 million machine that successfully traveled hundreds of millions of miles was lost in its final moments because of arithmetic any physics student could do on paper. The post-incident report called it a failure to communicate, heroic understatement. 25. The lobotomy was not fringe medicine, it was a Nobel Prize-winning procedure. Antonio Egas Moniz received the Nobel in 1949 for developing it. Walter Freeman later performed a version with an ice pick through the eye socket, reportedly in his car, on road trips, and dozens in a single day at state hospitals. The procedure left patients apathetic and cognitively diminished. This was sincerely framed as a therapeutic success. The Nobel Committee has never rescinded Moniz's prize. 26. Thalidomide was prescribed across Europe and Canada for morning sickness before evidence emerged it caused severe limb malformations in newborns. It was kept out of the United States by a single FDA reviewer, Francis Kelsey, who refused approval because the safety data was insufficient. The pharmaceutical company called her obstructionist. She was later given the highest civilian honor available to a federal employee. Over 10,000 children across multiple countries were affected. The entire American scope of that catastrophe rests on one bureaucrat's refusal to sign. Sometimes the most consequential historical act is a refusal. 27. In 2012, Cecilia Giménez, an elderly Spanish woman, attempted to restore a deteriorating church fresco of Jesus Christ without authorization. The result was described, charitably, as a fuzzy potato in a brown robe. It went globally viral. Tourists began arriving in the tiny town of Borja. Merchandise was sold. A charity raised funds. Giménez received a percentage of tourism revenue. The worst art restoration in modern memory accidentally revitalized a small Spanish town's economy. History's most chaotic outcomes don't always end in disaster. Sometimes they end in extremely peculiar community development. 27 entries. One lesson: the confidence of an era tells you nothing about the accuracy of its conclusions. The bloodletters thought they were saving lives. The Vasa engineers thought they were launching a warship. NASA thought the units matched. The next time an idea arrives wrapped in institutional authority, ask yourself which entry on this list it most resembles. What's the most surprising piece of history you've discovered wasn't what you were taught? Drop it below. Like and subscribe if you want more forensic audits of human decision-making. We have barely scratched the surface.